Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Leviticus chapter 25. This chapter of Leviticus wraps up the final section about the holidays and calendars for the Israelites. We've seen what the weekly and yearly calendar looks like, but here God sets up some special requirements for his people, specifically in cycles of 7. This chapter instructs on sabbatic years, where people rested for an entire year, as well as years of Jubilee, where debts were forgiven, slaves were freed, and land reverted back to its original owners. It's a radical requirement, even by our standards today, but we experience a call to do the same through how Jesus has freed us, forgiven us, and paid our debt. The Lord then spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, When you come into the land which I shall give you, then the land shall have a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its crop. But during the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field, nor prune your vineyard. Your harvest's aftergrowth you shall not reap, and your grapes of untrimmed vines you shall not gather. The land shall have a sabbatical year. All of you shall have the Sabbath products of the land for food, yourself and your male and your female servants, and your hired man, and your foreign resident, and those who live as aliens with you. Even your cattle and animals that are in your land shall have all its crops to eat." So just as the Jews would work 6 days and then rest on the 7th, they were instructed to do the same for 6 years and then rest in the year of the 7th. So the people were not supposed to plant or harvest every 7 years in order to let the land rest and be purified. Now practically, this would actually help the soil recover its nutrients, similar to how crops are rotated in modern farming techniques. But instead of simply rotating crops, the Israelites were instructed to take an entire season off. So what were they supposed to eat that year? God promised that if they obeyed this command, they would have enough to eat from the wild crops that God himself provided. And that's just like it was always supposed to happen back in Genesis 2. The sabbatic year was a concrete way to show that you trusted God and trusted in his provision, that you worshiped him really as the sustainer of all. And it was this macro version of all of the weekly Sabbaths. You are also to count off 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years, namely 49 years. You shall then sound a ram's horn abroad on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. You shall sound a horn all through your land. You shall thus consecrate the 50th year and proclaim a release through the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his own property, and each of you shall return to his family. You shall have the 50th year as a jubilee. You shall not sow, nor reap its aftergrowth, nor gather in from its untrimmed vines. For it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its crops out of the field. On this year of jubilee, each of you shall return to his own property. So every 50 years, that is after 7 sabbatic years, there's an extra special sabbatic year, which is called the Year of Jubilee. It starts on the first day of the Day of Atonement celebrations. You can see Leviticus 16 and 23. Now the word Jubilee comes from the Hebrew word Yobel, which literally translates to a trumpet or ram's horn. It was named for the horn that would blast on the first day of the festivities. And they're supposed to do everything they would normally do during a sabbatic year, that is, resting the land and not harvesting or reaping. But there would also be a release for all the people. That meant that slaves were freed and debts were forgiven, and all the people would return to their homelands and their families. If you make a sale, moreover, to your friend, or buy from your friend's hand, you shall not wrong one another. Corresponding to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your friend. He is to sell to you according to the number of years of crops. In proportion to the extent of the years, you shall increase its price, and in proportion to the fewness of the years, you shall diminish its price. For it is the number of crops he is selling to you. So you shall not wrong one another, but you shall fear your God. for I am the Lord your God. So in light of these rules about the Jubilee, God says that when you're buying a piece of land, you're actually only buying the crops that the land will produce until the next year of Jubilee. And that's how the Israelites are supposed to value their land. That's because when the year of Jubilee happens, all the possession of the land would revert back to the family of the original owners. The point was that everyone was going to have a piece of the promised land. There would be a spot for everyone. And even if you have to sell it, it would only be a matter of time before it reverts back to you or to your family. And it's all for the purpose so that no exploitation takes place among the Israelites. You shall thus observe my statutes and keep my judgments so as to carry them out, that you may live securely on the land. Then the land will yield its produce, so that you can eat your fill and live securely on it. But if you say, what are we going to eat on the 7th year if we do not sow or gather in our crops? Then I will so order my blessing for you in the 6th year, that it will bring forth the crop for 3 years. When you are sowing the 8th year, you can still eat old things from the crop, eating the old until the 9th year, when its crop comes in. God is dispelling any doubts about this setup, promising to provide for his people. If it looks like a sabbatic year might happen at an inopportune time, God promises that the crops produced in the 6th year will be enough to last 3. Enough to eat during the entire sabbatic year and the next one too. What God is saying is that this 7th year Sabbath should not induce anxiety. It should induce joy in the God who provides for and secures his people. But of course, this is assuming they actually obey his commands. The land, moreover, shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. For you are but aliens and sojourners with me. Thus, for every piece of your property, you are to provide for the redemption of the land. American capitalist culture would never understand a sabbatic year, much less a year of Jubilee. There's actually some scholarly debate as to whether the Israelites ever actually maintained these practices regularly. But the basis behind anyone being liberated every 50 years in order to return to their ancestral home, that had to be rooted in the fact that the only person who owned any land was God. We might have deeds and surveyors and assessors today, and I might own land in the eyes of the US government. But even today, I'm still renting. The land I live on is on a lease from the person who created it. If a fellow countryman of yours becomes so poor that he has to sell part of his property, then his nearest kinsman is to come and buy back what his relative has sold. Or in case a man has no kinsman, but so recovers his means as to find sufficient for its redemption, then he shall calculate the years since its sale and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it, and so return to his property. But if he has not found sufficient means to get it back for himself, then what he has sold shall remain in the hands of its purchaser until the year of Jubilee. But at the Jubilee, it shall revert, and he may return to his property. Now, the thing about a Jubilee was that it was a once-in-a-lifetime event, so it really couldn't be exploited. If a person just had to sell a piece of their land to get out of a bind, well, they could always buy it back, provided they had the money to pay for it. Or if they had a close relative who could buy it back for them. That's the basis of this idea of a kinsman redeemer found in Ruth 3 and 4. But even if the person who sold his land could not find a way to get it back, there was always hope for the Jubilee, where it would eventually revert back to him, or if he had died, it would revert back to his children. Verses 29 through 34 give more instructions about the redemption of land in the year of Jubilee. Houses inside a walled city that were sold could be redeemed for up to 1 year after they were sold, but they did not revert back in the Jubilee. Meanwhile, houses in a village, that is, outside of a walled city, those were considered as part of the field, and they did revert back in the Jubilee. The Levites also had specific rules for their cities, since they would be scattered throughout the rest of the land of Israel. Everything that was in a Levite city would revert back in the Jubilee, and their fields couldn't be sold at all. That was so that the Levites and the priests, who were supposed to be leading the people into God's presence, they could always have a constant presence among the people in Israel. Meanwhile, verses 35 through 46 deals with instructions for taking care of poor Israelites. They are not to be exploited with high interest rates, and silver and food shouldn't be sold to them in order to make a profit. If it gets so bad that an Israelite has to sell themselves into slavery, there are strict requirements to treat them as a hired man. That is, to not oppress them and to release them in the Jubilee. We also remember that this generation specifically has first-hand experience of all of the brutalities of slavery because of Egypt. God is demanding that they do not repeat those atrocities in their own community. God does say that non-Israelite slaves are not included in this mandate for release. But he also never encourages the people to have foreign slaves either. It's allowed as a concession in a world where slavery was unfortunately normal. We also remember how it was not in God's garden ideal for creation. And if we're to use Jesus' logic about divorce from Matthew 19, we realize that slavery has no place in God's new creation of church communities. Meanwhile, verses 47 through 54 elaborate on instructions for poor Israelites. If there's an Israelite who has to sell himself into slavery to a foreigner, a relative is required to redeem him. The poor man will then work for his relative as a hired man, according to all of the rules established earlier, so that he can pay off his debt. And yet, even still, the Jubilee will release him and clear him of his debt, so that he can go free. For the sons of Israel are my servants. They are my servants whom I brought out from the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And so God says that the reason he can demand these Jubilee releases for people is because, much like the land, God is the ultimate owner of all people. We owe him a debt we could never repay. That is our life, the breath in our lungs. Not to mention every sin that we've ever committed that separates us from him. The sin he paid for with his body through Jesus in order to redeem everyone and everything in a creation-wide Jubilee event. And so what we see is that these commands for sabbatic years and years of Jubilee, they're radical even by today's standards. But the purpose was for the people to show their trust in God's provision, to worship him for it, to acknowledge him as the creator and owner and sustainer of all of the land and every soul on it. And these years were meant to give hope to the people. No matter how poor they were, they could always wait patiently for God's deliverance and freedom through the Jubilee. We have the same and an even greater hope. Hope for a truly new and reconciled creation. But are we patient for it? Are we waiting for it or expecting it at all? Are we preparing the way for it today by treating our neighbors with dignity, by interceding for them and refusing to exploit them? Are we forgiving them for the debts that they owe us? Thanks for watching 1189. I hope you have a good day, and God bless.